Hello and welcome to the first. Is this the first ever episode of the State Press Sports Podcast, or have they done this before?
I think this is would be the first ever of a sports specific one. Yeah, I mean
All right.
we've done Barry Bonds episodes, but yeah, first one for just sports.
Oh, wow. This is the first ever episode of the State Press Sports Podcast. My name is Koki Riley. I'm here with Alex Coil. We are the State Press sports editors at the State Press, and we wanted to check in today and do a do a podcast on the MLB draft. It just concluded a few days ago as of this recording, and we just kind of wanted to get our thoughts out about all that's happened. And it was a historic night for ASU baseball, Alex.
Yeah, it was. ASU obviously it was only a 5 round draft, but still set some program records. Had 5 players selected in the first 4 rounds of the draft, and even had 2 incoming freshmen drafted. So we'll see if those guys sign or if they'll decide to come back to ASU. But yeah, the most draft picks of anybody of any school this season, and most in the first 4 rounds in program history.
And ASU gets to sort of extend their lead, their all-time lead in terms of drafted players from a program in NCAA history. Well, we should probably start off at the top. And when I mean at the top, I mean the very top of the MLB draft, where ASU had the number one overall selection, Spencer Torkelson, from the Detroit by the Detroit Tigers. This wasn't a huge surprise given how really incredible Torkelson was in his
Right.
2.25 years at ASU. So there wasn't any huge surprises here, other than the fact that maybe he was selected as a third baseman, despite playing little to no third base while with the Sun Devils. There's been a lot of talk about Torkelson getting picked as a third baseman. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, it was a thing where I didn't even hear it because I was not looking for it. Like that was not even the thing that even crossed my mind coming into it. And speaking to Jim Callis and ASU hitting coach Michael Early before, they kept harping on his versatility, and I'm like, why are they talking about this? Like, why do they keep saying he can play anywhere, when we know he's gotten much better at first base than when he came on as a freshman, and has been I guess in the last year a plus defender there, you could say, above average for a college player there, especially when you tie in that power and offensive stature. But when they were saying, don't be surprised if you can play some third base or some corner outfield in the minors, I was like, yeah, I don't understand that. And then he actually gets drafted, and you start to think, is that where he's going to be? Like, can he succeed there?
I think the corner outfield is a very interesting proposition because he did play a decent amount of corner outfield in the beginning of his college days, and he played some left field in the Cape Cod Baseball League as well. He didn't seem very natural out there. I'll say that, to say the least. As someone who did watch him play some outfield at the Cape, but I think it's really interesting. I think the Tigers want to at least explore this idea because A, he is a good athlete, and B, when you have the number one overall pick, you want to be able to use him in more spots other than be like a first base DH type. There hasn't been a corner. In fact, there hasn't been a corner infielder picked with the number one overall pick since Adrian Gonzalez back in 2000. So I think they want to try this idea. They see he's obviously an excellent athlete, and he's such a good hitter that even if he does just stick at first base, he's a franchise-esque player. And it'll be really interesting to see if he sticks there. But I think what was really interesting with the Tigers draft, and I think the ultimate reason why they went with Torkelson with the number one overall pick instead of a guy like, say, Asa Lacy, the pitcher, is because the Tigers organization is loaded with young pitchers.
Right.
Casey Mize, Matt Manning, Tariq Skubal, all these guys are potential top of the rotation starters, and Riley Green is their top offensive player. He's a really young outfielder. He's number 31 on MLB Pipeline's prospect rankings. They needed to boost up. They had a really good farm system anyway, but they needed to boost up their hitting. And now you add in a guy like Torkelson, and that problem's been solved already.
Right, exactly. And obviously the Tigers draft, and it was pretty ASU heavy as well, with Torkelson, Workman, and incoming freshman Colt Keith. And the thing with all three of those, they were announced as at least partially as third baseman. Keith was announced as a pitcher slash third baseman, so they're gonna see what's best for him. I project Keith as more of um, the offensive kind of guy. And again, in talking to Coach Early, he saw the talent there years ago. And it was really surprising because you see Torkelson, majority first baseman, Workman, third base. But the unique thing about him, he's a switch hitter and is pretty much the same hitter from both sides that he showed at the beginning of this year. And then Keith, who can play in the middle of the field. So maybe what they're trying to do is throw as many shots at the dartboard and see who can land at third when they know they have backup options for the other two guys.
Yeah, and the Tigers' entire draft was all hitters.
Right.
And that wasn't a mistake with the amount of pitching depth they already have. Dylan Dingler, which was their second-round pick, he's a catcher out of Ohio State. Daniel Cabrera, who really succeeded in the Cape as the competitive balance draft pick in the second round. Trey Cruz, who got drafted out of Rice as a shortstop, to go along with the three ASU players, well, technically three, two to be exact. But I think this is a good segue to talk about Gage Workman's selection in the fourth round. Some were expecting him to be more of a second or third round selection, but I think some teams may have been maybe afraid of the fact that he hasn't been able to hit for as much power as you'd expect for a guy of his size. What was your reaction to him falling all the way to the fourth?
Yeah, something that really was the question mark for him, and I think why he slid was his signability. And you can kind of save some money if you draft him later than if you were draft him high slot value. He's very young for the age group he is in. I mean, he's only 20 currently, and he's through his junior eligibility in the NCAA, so he can come back and still be 21 after his fourth season and get that draft, get drafted and have that, because 21, 22 is kind of where scouts are like, yeah, I don't know, we're gonna. You kind of lose your leverage. So I think that was part of an issue. And then you mentioned the power. He struggled with that until literally the last game ASU played. He had a home run from both sides of the plate and showed the power. So power can work, but he's a good hitter. And Coach Early thinks that he could be a Gold Glover at third base. He said that he doesn't know for sure what a Gold Glover is made of, but he assumes that Workman has to start for that.
Yeah, I'm impressed with Workman's glove. I thought he was even stronger defensively as a shortstop when he got to play there a little bit in the Cape League. I got to cover him on a day-to-day basis in the Cape, got to cover him with the Sun Devils, and I've seen his development really for the last 2 years. And it's been really interesting to see him just sort of grow into becoming this excellent fielder. But I think the big thing with him is cutting down the strikeouts and finding a way to improve that power tool, because he has the frame and the athleticism to be a really, really good hitter, everyday hitter. So I think it was a fascinating draft for the Tigers, to say the least.
Yeah, because basically, again, going that third route, you get the for sure offensive guy in Torkelson. You get the for sure defensive guy in Workman, and then you get the young talent that can really develop into anything, whatever you want, kind of more the raw guy. You develop him with that fifth round pick. So it's interesting to see if they can sign Keith and sign Workman. But if they do, they get all three, and one of them is going to work at third. I mean, statistics will say that.
I think maybe we can get into this more later, but I think given the fact that it was only a 5-round draft makes me feel at least that there's a better chance that there's going to be a lot more signings this year from
Right. Yeah.
Some of these guys. Like, you have to have a lot of confidence in being able to have the money to shell out and sign the guy. It's part of the reason why some of these players like a Workman or Cole Wilcox out of Georgia fell all that far in the draft. It was a lot of it because some teams just either they liked the player and they just didn't have the finances to sign him because of the picks they made earlier, or some teams that would punt on a pick a punt is a little too strong of a word, but I think you know what I'm trying to say, and um, and try to save that money to pick a guy they really like later in the draft.
Right.
So I think this is a good time to transition to the Tampa Bay Rays. And why Tampa is because with their competitive balance pick in the first round, they selected Alika Williams. He was the last selection in that first day of drafting, which was the first round and the competitive balance A round, the first A round, so which is part of the first round. It's a really complex whole system that it would take days for us to really get into.
Right.
But either way, Williams was the 37th overall pick in the draft. Played all his, really played, I think I want to say around halfway through his freshman year, they switched him and Drew Swift between second and short. And ever since then, Williams is stuck as a shortstop. And I think what scouts have consistently said about him is what they like about him most is the fact that he projects to be just a shortstop going down the line. You can't say that a lot about guys who are drafted as shortstops at a college or in especially high school even. So what was your reaction to Williams getting picked by the Rays?
The thing that Jim Callis told me was he is probably the best defensive shortstop from the college side in the draft.
That's interesting.
So shortstop is a position where a lot of it is defense, and as we said with Workman earlier, he is a sure thing at shortstop. Now the offense is basically the question mark. And in talking to Coach Early, he really said that they looked into it and they thought Williams was doing too much at the plate early on in his Sun Devil career. Looking at the 2-strike counts, you do better in 2-strike counts than in hitters counts because in 2-strike counts, he's just trying to put the ball in play and not do too much for it. I was in attendance for his first collegiate home run at Cal State Fullerton last year. He ended up with 4 home runs in that season, had 1 early this year, and Coach Early thinks that he would have had double digits and hit in the high 300s. Hit 333 last season, which jumping up 53 points from 280 his freshman season. And in the Pac-12, that's no slouch, especially with the kind of lineup that he was hitting in. There were really no holes. So he was getting the best stuff that anybody could throw at him, and he was still getting on one out of every 3 times.
I don't have too many questions about Williams' hit tool. He was on Team USA for a reason. I don't think he'll just be a defensive specialist in the minor leagues. And if he makes the majors, it's a very different league out there. But I don't think he'll be a total minus on that side of the baseball. But I think the issue here, I guess with that, what some scouts and some teams have problems with is the lack of a frame, the lack of power potential. Keith Law in his report, the Athletics Keith Law said that he would be lucky if Williams was a grade 40 power hitter by the time he reaches the major leagues. And he has added some muscle and size since his freshman year at ASU, but he had never hit a home run in his life until summer ball after his freshman season. So he has improved a little bit in that area, but it's tough to see him ever hitting 15 home runs in an MLB season.
Right, which makes the Rays the perfect spot for him, because they're not necessarily looking at, if there were any Moneyball franchise today, it would be the Rays. They're the most analytical team in baseball. I mean, you could obviously argue that, but I believe they're the most analytical team in baseball. They're not going to go out and sign an Aaron Judge. They're going to win it with the numbers. So at the shortstop spot, what are they going to be expecting from him on the offensive side? Obviously, he's going to hit for a decent average if his college numbers project. Obviously, he struggled this year, but brought it back towards the end before the season got cut. He's not going to hit a ton of home runs, but that glove is so great there. Arm is a little iffy sometimes in terms of arm strength, but that's, again, something that you mentioned. Once he gains that 20, 30 pounds of muscle, when you get in a pro development lifting system. Who knows?
Mm, that's for sure. Before we move on, I do want to touch on the Rays system, which is really fascinating because I'd say of their top 6, 7 prospects, 3 of them can play shortstop, if not are shortstops. And one of them is the number 1 prospect in Major League Baseball, and that's Wander Franco. He's a young shortstop, still a teenager, actually, or is he 20? I'm not 100% sure. I have to double check that. But regardless, he is a shortstop. He will be somewhat in the way of Williams. Vidal Brujan and Xavier Edwards are also up the middle players, and it's really interesting to see the Rays sort of load up even more up the middle of the field, especially defensively, because all those guys can defend.
Right, yeah, and they also drafted another shortstop in the draft, Tanner Murray from UC Davis, with their 4th-round selection. So, again, getting 2 shortstops there. So, again, depth is going to be a strength the Rays there, but might be some more guys for Williams to jump. But another ASU connection that the Rays drafted, Hunter Barnhart, pitcher, that was going to be a signee. They took him in the 3rd round. So, again, is he going to be signed? Usually that 3rd round, especially with the 5-round draft, I would say yes. But another ASU connection goes to the Rays.
Yeah, it's really the Rays and the Tigers really dipping into that ASU system. 5 players combined from just those 2 teams. Next player, the next highest ASU selection was with the 99th overall pick. The Yankees selected Trevor Hauver.
Yeah.
Before Gage Workman, which was a surprise to some. But I think what's even more notable here is that Hauver was drafted as a second baseman, despite I don't remember him ever playing an inning of second base at ASU. But I will say when he came out of high school, he was an infielder. So there is a history there of flexibility. But let me pose this question to you, Alex. Why did the Yankees draft Trevor Hauver as a second baseman? Why do you think?
Well, obviously you don't necessarily draft. Obviously, relief pitching is kind of different. You don't draft for your major league team, but you look at that major league outfield. You got Stanton under contract for a while. You have Judge, who's going to be there for a long time. You got other guys in the outfield, Hicks. So the outfield's log jammed at the major league level, which causes it to get log jammed at the minor league level as well. Hauver, a guy that doesn't have the greatest arm from the outfield necessarily. So, as you mentioned, came into college as an infielder. Second base could be a good position. He has great lateral quickness, so middle infield is going to be solid for him. And it's a good place for his bat to – he can focus on his bat, and he has plus numbers at the second base position as opposed to a corner outfield position.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating what the Yankees did. They picked 3 college players. First, they selected Arizona's Austin Wells with the 28th pick in the 1st round. Really good hitting catcher. And then they didn't have a 2nd round pick due to the fact that they signed Garrett Cole. And so in the 3rd round, they picked up Hauver with the 99th pick. And I think Hauver is an appeal to some of these MLB teams because of the fact that he can get on base and he has some power potential, and he could potentially move around the field in terms of there is a history there in the infield, there's a history there in the outfield, and it really depends on how high you think a player like him and his ceiling is. And to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I kind of wish he didn't strike out as much as he does. But regardless, there isn't too many gaping holes in his game as there is even in a Workman who might have the higher ceiling but does have the power problem, or Williams who also has that similar sort of power problem. Yeah, Hauver's a really solid player and does a really excellent job of getting on base, and that's going to be appeal for any team. And as for the whole second base aspect, we'll see. We really don't know because we didn't really get much of a chance to see him play much second base.
Right, exactly. Going back to those offensive numbers, consistency in the average, his sophomore season, 339 average. In 17 games of his junior season, 339 average. Now, something that did, you mentioned he struck out a lot. This year was the first season that he walked more than he struck out, so there is a little bit of a development there. On-base percentage rose 61 points from season to season. From his freshman to his sophomore season, it jumped from 344 to 433. Then it jumped from 433 to 494. So obviously did a very good job protecting Spencer Torkelson. Slugged 695, 20 RBI in 59 at-bats compared to 50 RBI in 242 at-bats from the season prior. So obviously a little small sample size, but he was hot. He was Coach Hurley thought he was the second best hitter in the Pac-12 behind Spencer Torkelson this season. Obviously that's kind of the hitting coach kind of trying to get his guys higher on the list, but he showed it. He was able to protect Spencer Torkelson, and he put up some really good numbers.
And I think it's interesting the Yankees went with two hitters toward the top of their draft board, given that right now, with the state of their system, their top two prospects are pitchers, including Davy Garcia and Clark Schmidt. And they had a young kid named Jason Dominguez, who no one's really seen much of, but apparently he's a really high ceiling player. But besides that, they don't have a ton. So they needed to hit on these two picks, which is probably why they went with two guys who can get on base one way or another from the college game, and Austin Wells and, of course, ASU's Trevor Hauver. Well, the final Sun Devil, the fifth Sun Devil to get picked in the first four rounds, was R.J. Davovich. He was selected in the fourth round by the San Francisco Giants. And Davovich came in as a junior college recruit the previous season. And he's a guy who's really popped when it comes to his velocity on the mound. So what was your reaction to him getting selected within the first four rounds?
Yeah, so he really projects as a relief pitcher. He's not consistent enough throwing strikes to be a starter. He doesn't have that much of a development of a second pitch, although he did try to develop a slider, curveball, slurve combination, some sort of off-speed pitch that helped him earlier this season. So he's going to project as a relief pitcher, which does help him though, because he's a guy that can be on the fast track to the big leagues to help a bullpen rotation. Obviously, the Giants are going to be contending relatively soon, but whenever they do, if they make a shocking run in whatever 48-game schedule they play this year, you never know. The ERA for me, again, small sample size because that's the only season we had to go off of in 2020, but 2019 4.75 ERA. 0.77 ERA this year. They pretty much used him exclusively as a closer. 4 saves, had 3 saves a season ago, only allowed 3 hits, 1 earned run, 17 strikeouts in almost 12 innings. So strikeout numbers are tremendous, but it's getting the walks down is going to be something, and keeping the composure if something goes wrong.
I would totally agree, and given that small sample size, it certainly helped him. But I don't think he would have been a top 5 round pick if it weren't for his strong outing on the Cape. He showed he could be a really effective reliever, and his fastball, from what I saw at least, was mid 90s with movement, and that's a rare thing to see. So, and you give credit to Davovich for making himself into a top 4 round pick. He does need to, if he can develop that second pitch, he can certainly help a major league team's bullpen. Well, Alex, those are the 5 to 7, I guess, ASU draftees in this year's MLB draft. Again, as we said earlier at the top, this is the first time in ASU draft history where the Sun Devils had 5 players drafted in the first 4 rounds of the MLB draft. Part of that may have had to do with the fact that it was a shortened draft, regardless, ASU had a lot of talent on their team. So yeah, that'll about do it for me. Do you have any parting thoughts, Alex?
No, just one more thing on Spencer Torkelson that I thought was interesting is
Okay.
something that Jim Callis said, that he was the most he was probably the best collegiate hitter to come out of the draft since Mark Teixeira in 2001. So
A lot of 2000, Adrian Gonzalez, first overall
yep.
pick as a corner infielder. 2001, Mark Teixeira. Yeah, and that's a very fascinating observation. So yeah, that'll about do it for us here at the State Press Sports Podcast. I believe this is the first ever. We believe, at least, this is the first ever edition, and we hope to be talking to you guys again sometime in the near future. Hopefully next week. I don't know. We haven't sort of totally planned that part out yet, but
Need some sports.
exactly sports though. So for Alex and I, thank you for listening.